This episode of the Better Every Shift podcast is sponsored by L3 Harris Technologies. When the heat is on, you go all in, and L3 Harris will be right there with you. The XL Extreme 400p radio is tailor-made to meet the most rigorous fire standards. Learn more at www.l3harris.com/fire. Now let's get into the show.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Better Every Shift podcast. My name is Aaron Zamzow. I am here with Janelle Fosquetz, my co-captain, editor-in-chief, the wheels behind this machine. How are you today, Janelle?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am great. I'm always fired up for this. Obviously, that's probably why you guys have me here, because we have a real badass in the fire service that nobody knows about, and I'm kind of embarrassing him right now because he is probably one of the smartest individuals I know, and he's contributed for over 40 years to leadership, to the fire service. We are very, very honored and excited. I'm excited to welcome Chief Randy Bruegman. How you doing, Chief?
I'm great, Aaron. How are you? It's good to see you again.
Good to see you. So let me tell a little background about Chief and I. Chief, you and I have had some coffee clutches over the last couple of years, and you've helped really provide a lot of insight and guidance for me. And so we just decided to take our coffee clutch to this podcast because I always walk away with just my head kind of going, wow, that's, it's almost like a Forrest Gump approach that you have, I think, with the fire service, and that Mama always said things in a way that made me understand. And leadership is something that you are really, really good at, and communicating and telling stories. And for those that don't know about Chief Bruegman, you need to, and hopefully after this, you will go out and listen to his podcast and read his book. But again, I truly believe that he's one of the most intelligent and should be sought after people to present to your departments here. He's served as a fire chief in multiple departments. Lastly was Anaheim. Became focused on leadership and managing and changing organizations. You're the past president of the IFC and the Center for Public Health Safety Education, or Public Safety Education. You're actually a legend and a badass, specifically inducted into the Hall of Legends, Leaders, and Legacies class of 2022 with the National Fire Heritage Center. You founded the Leadership Crucible Foundation, and just a generally really good person and mentor. And like I said, I'm super excited to have you here. And I know you've been working on the Leadership Crucible Foundation. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and kind of what has been the fire behind that?
Well, thanks, Aaron. Thanks for that really nice introduction, and I appreciate it. And I really enjoy when we have the opportunity to sit down and just chat. I mean, I may give you some perspective, but you give me perspective as well. And I appreciate, that you're bringing the firehouse back to me. I miss, being there, being able to sit down with the folks and around the coffee table and hear, what their lives are about. Because I mean, they're doing great work just like you every day when they're on shift. So I appreciate everything you do and everything that all of our firefighters and medics do each and every day. It's a hard job. But Leadership Crucible Foundation, here's kind of what the impetus was for that. I retired in 2018, wrote a couple of textbooks, really focused on, which really helped me to focus on just the leadership aspects of our profession. And during that time, I had to do a lot of research, a lot of reading, just kind of following what was going on in trending, what was happening nationally, internationally in our society. And I found myself growing much, really frustrated with what I was seeing from a leadership perspective in our country, with our politicians, at the local level, oftentimes local government, and in business and in organizations. Just the lack of the ability to do the hard things, to make the right decisions, to look not at doing political decisions, but actually making strategic decisions for our country, for our organizations, and looking at things not in a such a myopic from a tunnel view standpoint, but actually taking a long-term vision on what's best. And so that really drove me to have some discussions with folks about, what can we do to maybe make a small ripple in this big pond that we have in life and in our world, but what can we do to start to make a difference? And so we created the Leadership Crucible podcast first to begin to do that. And my focus wasn't on the fire service, and it's still not, because leadership transcends all professions and all walks of life. So I think of the 22 podcasts that we've done so far, 30, we've got 8 in production now. So of the 30, I've probably interviewed 3 fire chiefs. And the rest of the people come from just all different professions and different backgrounds, different experiences. But, there's a common theme through each one of the podcasts, and it comes through loud and clear. It's about the challenges that they have faced, that have helped to shape who they have become as leaders and who they've become as people, and kind of how they dealt with overcoming some of those obstacles that they faced when they were growing up. And some of these folks have had really challenging environments, but they all came through it with a perspective of wanting to make the world a better place and do the right things. So I'm really focused on finding those people, telling their story, building some development training around that we can hand off to organizations, school systems, so that we can maybe have a small impact on the next generation of leaders and leaders like yourself that are coming up to look at things differently than they're being taught today. Because we often learn off of our phones and the internet and things like that. We have about an 8 or 10 second perspective, and we're really losing the ability to have critical thinking and really ask the tough questions. I was watching the news last night, and if you watch, depending upon what news channel you watch, you get different stories, but none of them really delve into and really ask the tough questions. It's all about the spin now. And, we've lost the ability to actually challenge our leadership. And as a leader, I've been challenged a lot. And that's a good thing. When you're not challenged, then you can go rogue. Right? You can just do whatever you want.
Yeah, and the theme that we've had on the podcast too is that leaders need to almost get comfortable being uncomfortable. And those questions help you grow as a leader, right? Like you said, you want someone to ask that question because that helps you grow as a leader and it helps you think a little bit differently, right?
No, absolutely. You never grow as an individual or as a leader when you're in your comfort zone. You always grow when you're pushed outside of it. And it forces you to do things that you hadn't had to do before, or face issues that you haven't faced. So it challenges you to actually go through that critical thinking process for yourself to determine what's my right path, what's the right path for the organization. And if you're and we see this in the fire service a lot, chiefs that have been in the same organization for 10 or 15, 20 years, organization doesn't change. They're really comfortable with things that, going the way they're going, but the organization and the people in it aren't progressing. And so, if you're not pushing the envelope, I mean, I've always thought that one of my roles was to always push the envelope as the leader of the organization. And I think that helps people to become, I think it helps the organization to become more progressive and innovative. And I think it does for the individuals that work in it as well.
Well, it's interesting because it underscores the idea of the problem with surrounding yourself with the so-called yes men, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you surround yourself with yes men, you're never going to get pushed, you're never going to get challenged, and everything's just going to stay status quo forever. Not necessarily getting better, but potentially getting worse.
Yeah. Well, I totally agree. And I mean, one of the key attributes of good leadership is you always surround yourself with people that are smarter than you are. And so, I never professed to be a great operations person, a great EMS person. a great finance person, but I always got people or attracted people or went out and found them that had that area of expertise that I didn't have. My expertise, I think, is looking at things strategically, looking at the future, being able to kind of wrangle everybody together and get them focused and moving forward. But it's not those individual elements of the organization. And so often I've seen so many chiefs, they just get focused on, they come from the operational side and that's all they know. Well, I came from the operational side, but I don't know if I was very good at it, but I came from the operational side. But I quickly realized that my role wasn't operations. My role wasn't, EMS. My role was to be at 25,000 feet all the time, looking at where we're going, how we're going to land the plane when it's rough, and then how we're going to get to where we need to get in the next 5, 10, 15 years and position the organization to do that. And so a lot of chiefs get really mired in where they've come from. They can't get out of it. And they just kind of fall into the same trap of, what they've always done. And unfortunately, a lot of our organizations today in the fire and emergency services are kind of in that rut. And that's part of what we need to get them out of, because of the change process in the next 20 or 30 years, which we've talked about a lot, Aaron, is going to revolutionize how we do business.
And do you think too, a lot of times, going back to the fire service, you and I've had this conversation that, a chief says, my desk doesn't have a lot of complaints on it. Well, it's hard to get a complaint when the door's closed.
Yeah.
And you isolate yourself to the people that you want to hear from. And Janelle mentioned the yes men. And one thing I didn't mention also, I mean, you've been in the fire service for 40 years.
Yeah.
And I like to say you're still in it because I like to try to keep you in it by picking your head as much as I can. But you wrote the Advanced Fire and Emergency Services Administration book. Now, most people look at me and go, yeah, it's not a real sexy title. And, I would agree with that. But I was telling Janelle, even before this, I said, Chief gave me a copy of his book and I started reading it. And there are pictures in there, of course, for all our listeners that are wondering, because yes, that's what kept me going. And honestly, there's a lot of stuff that you and I've been advantageous to have you in front of me, but you talk about how you change that culture, how you, as a chief or even as a leader of your crew, how you make an impact with you talk about community, B, you talk about, being a listener and being able to connect. As far as the fire service, and I know we talked about, in general leadership, but what do you think we're missing in the fire service from a leadership standpoint, even beyond what the rest of society is?
I think one of the things, I don't know if it's missing, I just don't know if we utilize it fully. And, we get it's really easy for us to get focused on what happens day to day, right? I mean, we're a mission critical service. And so we have got to be focused on, when that alarm goes off, that our people are ready to respond. We've got the right equipment, right training, right staffing levels, right staff to pull off, the events that we go to every day. And so it gets us really focused on that piece of it. But I think, as we look to where the fire and emergency services is going, there's a different mindset that you need to take into that discussion. And that is, how's it going to change? One of the things in the 21st Century Report, one of the 8 critical issues was re-identification. And if I had to do that over again after the last 3 years, I would retitle that to Reimagine.
Reimagine the fire service.
Yeah, because after, you talked about, the textbook and all that, and just the research and going out and speaking with people and watching just the evolution of technology and data just in the last 3 years, it's been incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really going to change the way that we conduct and operate our business in the next 10, 15, 20 years dramatically. So we have to reimagine what that's going to look like. And if you think about our organizations today, we do everything off of a big red fire truck with 4 people. And if that's your vision of the future, hang on, because there's going to be big red fire trucks with 4 people, but instead of having 30 of them in your community, you're going to have 10.
Yeah.
It's going to change. I mean, it's just going to change. And because we're already seeing an evolution of service demand, I mean, every organization that's running EMS, it's about 75 to 85% of their call volume. And if you really drill down on those EMS calls, about 30% of those are true emergencies where you need those paramedics. The rest of it's behavioral health, social service work. It's connecting the dots with the people in the field that don't know how to connect with services often. So I mean, it's an important element for us, but we're still focused on doing everything from a 1980 emergency. If you remember the old show Emergency, that was the impetus of where we're at today. Was trauma related stuff, and we still deal with that, and we need to be able to deal with that, but it's a small portion of what we do. So we have to be able to evolve with that, and part of that is, I guess, the other piece of the pie here. I think there's 3 really critical pieces: reimagining what we're to become, and I think secondly is our culture. And we have to start building a culture that's much more adept and adaptable for the future. And so we need to be having those conversations in our organizations today about, folks, what we're doing today is not going to sustain us in the future. And so as we reimagine what we're going to be, let's collectively, not just the chiefs, but the rank and file, get everybody together and start talking about what's that going to look like? What do we need to do? And how do we get there? So that it's not only everything's out on the table, but everything is understood. And I think a lot of times our folks that are sitting on Engine 8, they're not getting that big picture discussion and dialogue, and they need to have it because our profession is going to change. And I think we have to realize that leads into kind of the third element, and that is, how do we sustain ourselves long term? And I think we're really in a unique position in the fire and emergency services because, number one, we're the most trusted profession in the world. And so we should use that to our advantage. And how we use that to our advantage, we'll say, we're going to take over and we're going to bring, we don't have to take it over, but we're going to bring under our umbrella all of the other ancillary services that we call upon every day. And we're going to facilitate a community risk reduction strategy that's holistic, and it's not just focused on fire and EMS. And, if we do that, we'll have social services, we'll have behavioral health services, we'll have other resources under our operational control where we're really looking at the big picture and connecting the dots. And we'll be able to do that much better with the data utilization that we have today. And we'll make a great impact on creating a high level of community resiliency. But to do that, we're going to have to change our mindset.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the book, and you and I have had this great conversation about this. You mentioned like Kodak,
Yeah.
different company, Kodak and Pets.com, and some of these that they didn't, right? These companies didn't change and evolve, and they're no longer in existence. And people think, well, that'll never happen with the fire service. Well, we can't be so sure of that because we're even seeing that with recruitment, right? You and I have talked about it. That's where we're starting to see it first. Recruitment is such a huge issue. And you've actually interviewed someone on your podcast about, what direction we need to go with that even. And you want to elaborate on that a little bit also? I thought that was brilliant, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the Pathway program, and we're seeing I'll just tell you the short story. Clayton County, Georgia, Chief Landry Murkison, who is now the Chief Operational Deputy for the entire county. They he was such a great leader, and he is that they moved him up.
Yeah.
And so, but he realized that his workforce wasn't reflective of their community. And so he created a pathway program with the high school to actually bring in high school students to look at the different professions that exist in public safety. Initially, it was designed for public safety, so police, fire, dispatching services, EMS, things like that. And so they would, the first year, they would just explore all of those. By the time they got into their sophomore year, they had to either choose out or choose a path. And those that chose fire service then went into training with their personnel for the next 3 years. So when they came out of high school, they were certified hazmat technicians, certified EMTs. They had to go to 2 weeks of school after they graduated high school to get their firefighter one, because they had already had all the other training. They just couldn't take the fire training. And so when they walked across to graduate high school, they got a high school diploma and a job offer. And which is just incredibly, and now that's gone to, I think, 6 or 7 high schools in his area.
Mhm.
So it's expanded out. So it's just a model program. But here's the two most important things. One is he's driving his workforce directly from his community, number one. And he has very poor areas in his community. And so he said a lot of these kids, as soon as they came into being part of the fire service, became the number one breadwinner in their family. And it changed the entire economic dynamic of that home. The other thing it did is it's showing the kids around them, and we're having big issues with our young people today in a lot of our urban areas, that they too can actually track in a way that's very positive, and at the end of the day, actually have employment. And so just an incredible process. But I'm hearing that too from other industries as I've talked with folks from Pierce and Darley and other folks that are, really struggling to get those really high quality technicians and craftsmen to help build things. They're looking at how they can create pathways into their own organization so that they can sustain themselves in the future. So, I think it's just it's kind of a microcosm of what's going on in our society today, and the lack of focus on being able to do certain things. Trades are a big issue right now, and so I think we need to find a balance from a society standpoint, because frankly, everybody can go out and get a 4-year degree, but you may not be able to find a job.
Yeah,
And
what's it get you then after that, other than
yeah,
some debt, Yeah.
yeah. So I think, and I think we and I mean, I've probably been part of it. All of our kids went to college and all of that, because that was a real focus for us. But I mean, just look at the lack of people that are going into the trades that and and they can make as much, if not more, than people that are going to college. So I think you just have to follow your passion, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's interesting because right now we are in the data analysis phase of the What Firefighters Want survey related to stress and staffing, recruitment, retention, how all of these issues interconnect. And just a quick little teaser here, but one of the points that we're finding related to recruitment is it's pretty shocking the number of departments that are doing literally nothing in terms of programs to entice members. So, there's a lot of talk about the issue, but only a percent, not a huge percentage are really taking advantage of all the tools at their disposal and thinking big picture and strategically about what the future of their organization is going to look like, because they're kind of just doing the same old thing, if
Mhm.
anything, really, because for so long, there was just a line out the door of people who wanted to work for the fire service and no one had to do anything proactively. And now it's the opposite. And so it was pretty amazing to see some of those stats. So we'll be we'll be unpacking those in the next few weeks.
Well, I think that there's two really key points there. One is that's gets back to the previous discussion we just had about I'm just minding the store. I'm out of here in 3 to 5 years. I'm going to retire. So why should I worry about year 6, 7, 8, 10? And unfortunately, a lot of folks in our profession bring that attitude. Not everybody, but there's a lot that are just kind of hanging out. I came from the operational side, so I'm just going to be operational focused for the next 5 years, and then I'm going to punch my ticket and retire. So they're not looking down the road. That's unfortunate for many organizations. The other piece, I think, is just the generational shift that we're seeing, especially with Gen Z coming into the workforce now. I think they're almost a third of our workforce, and that's going to increase every year for the next decade. So they will become in the next decade our majority of the workforce in this country, probably worldwide. And they bring a different perspective. Number one is they're probably not going to be 30 and out. They'll probably be 7 and 8 and out. They're going to move jobs more readily than we did. And but the other thing I think it's interesting is they're looking at how we do business, and a lot of them don't want to come into our business because of the shift work and the exposure to all of the stuff that we get exposed to every day. And they're going, why should I do that? Why should I work 24 or 48 hours and be away from my family? I want work-life balance. And so that doesn't really provide it. And I don't really know why I have to get exposed to all that stuff. And it pays not that good. And so I think it's an interesting time. But Janelle, I think you bring up a really great point, is that we're just doing business the way we've always done business. But the world around us is changing. And I think that was kind of the focus of the 21st Century Report, was to get people to talking about, what's it going to look like, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now. And I think for many chiefs, and if you're a chief listening to this, you need to start looking at how you position your organization today for the next 10 years out. If you're not doing that, you're not doing your job, and then you ought to just hang it up and give it to somebody that'll do it. Because it's going to change so quickly, you're not going to have time to react. If you're not, you probably won't ever be at the forefront of change from here on out, because it's exponentially increasing so quickly. But if you're sitting back doing the same thing that you did 10 years ago and think that's going to carry you forward, you're going to bury your organization.
Yeah, and I just want to mention real quick, we'll put the link to the report in the show notes for the 21st Century Fire and Emergency Services. You co-chaired that project with the CPSC, and I just want to read through these real quick in terms of the critical issues. You mentioned re-identification, maybe now better thought of as reimagining.
Mm-hmm.
Culture, which you mentioned, robust use of data, health and wellness, partnerships, sustainability, technology, and inclusiveness, and how all of those interconnect to really, that's what chiefs and leaders, I should say, need to be thinking about, the intersection of all of these factors and where their department stands with each one of those points.
Well, getting back to Clayton County, and again, a shout out to Chief Murkison, but he took these 8 issues and he rolled those into his strategic plan. And what was really fascinating to me, he called up and said, he said, you won't believe this, but he said the counties picked it up and they rolled it into their strategic plan. And so I don't know if we hit on the right 8 issues for the future. I think they are really, really important issues. But I've had several chief executives from other professions call and say, well, I don't know, this is like, if you change fire service to attorneys, or if you change fire service to whatever, these are the same things we're talking about. And so I think we may have hit on some of the topical issues that I think most organizations are facing today. And yeah, I think it's we have such great people in the fire and emergency services, but sometimes they are so reticent to change, and pushing the envelope and getting outside of their comfort zone, that it really, I think, as we get farther into the 21st century, it's going to place us in a position, if we don't change that mindset of looking much differently. Because frankly, if a city manager called me today and said, I'm going to build a city of 250,000 people, and we're going to do it in the next 3 years, and I want you to come in and design our deployment package and fire and emergency services, and you don't have to do what we've always done. If you had the opportunity to do that, what would it look like? I can tell you it'd look a lot different than what we're doing today.
Well, and that brings me to a good question. You and I have had this great discussion. I go back to a lot of these discussions because I've been so excited to get them on the podcast about, you mentioned 1, 3, 5-year plans and having a plan. And then what's the next step of that? So you say, hey, this is where I think the organization needs to go. What's the next step for a chief? If they're listening, and even a lieutenant, you don't have to be a chief. I mean, even your own personal self, you can utilize the same thing, like have some vision, 1, 3, 5. But if you're a chief, if sitting in a town or a municipality, you sit down, you say, this is where I think we need to go. This is where we are. What's your next step then after that?
Well, I think the first step when you say I'm going to build a strategic plan is you say I'm going to build a 3 or 5-year strategic plan, and you engage your staff, your employees, and you engage the community. Oftentimes we build plans in our organizations that are built just around what we think. And when you actually go out and bring the community in and involve them in helping to design what you're to become, you get a bit different perspective. So I think that's rule number one: is make it a holistic event. No, don't make it 5 chiefs sitting in a room, just regurgitating the same thing where they've come from, because that doesn't work. Or
we find that plan doesn't go very far, because if part of that plan falls on their desk and they're comfortable with just where they're at, that it's not going to go anywhere, right?
Yeah. But I think on the strategic plan, there's a couple of things. One is, and I'm sure I drove my staff crazy doing this, but I everything in the strategic plan had goals and objectives built around it, and we would meet every 4 to 5 weeks, and I would make them report out. What's in? Not everything was in play, but I would say where are we at with the things that are in play, so that I would keep them focused on meeting those objectives. I also would always take the update of the strategic plan back to the city council and the city manager, or whoever you work for, every year, and reintroduce it to them, saying, here's how far we've gotten this past year. Because number one, if we're focused on it day to day, they're focused on it annually, and seeing what the objectives, what have been met, and tying that back to your budget, then it just all kind of integrates, and then it really helps to drive the organization. And so that I found that to be very, very successful in the last 3 organizations that I worked in. But it does take a lot of energy to do that. But the end result is you really get, I think, a holistic buy-in from your elected officials. There's no surprises from them. You coming in and going, I need 3 fire trucks, or I need this, or I need that. Well, that was part of the plan. You guys adopted the plan. We've been talking about it for 4 years, so they can't go, I've never heard of that before. And your employees the same way. We've been talking about this. This is where we're going. You helped to build this plan. And then also your staff, they know what to focus on. So
how do you get your staff to buy in? How do you get, that front end person to buy into that then?
Staff wise?
Yeah.
Well, I think staff wise, when you're the chief, you can bring at least your senior staff, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, even like front end, you got someone down on the field, sometimes they're like, administration, this and this and that. Like, how do you kind of connect with that person and make them feel part of this?
Well, I mean, the way that I've done that is to actually invite them to help build it. But that doesn't mean that they're still going to support it. I mean, one of the things about firefighters is, they'll be in the room to help build it, and then they'll go back out in the fire station and bitch about it.
Yeah.
Right. And
we hate two things: the way it is and change.
Yeah, and that's okay. I mean, they had a bite at the apple. They helped build it. They probably understand, and that's not all of them. I mean, some of them will do that. But you still have to engage. You still have to always want to engage them. And I think just periodically, I mean, as you go around and do your station visits, or you're on the shop floor, or whatever business you're in, right? And you're talking to your folks, you always want to talk about what you're doing. What's going on with you, but also here's what we're doing, and here's where we're at strategically, and this is what we're doing, and here's what we're planning to do for next year. And it's really important to keep everybody on the same page. It's kind of that 4P. What is it? Purpose, plan, part, picture. So if everybody knows what the purpose is, and that's kind of your strategic plan, and they know what their part is, how do you make an impact on that? What's your role in that? And then what's going to look like when we get to the end? What are we trying to achieve? And then the plan is the plan, right? So if everybody is kind of operating off of the same dialogue, it just makes it a lot easier. It doesn't mean that you don't get over it. There's going to be some folks, there's always the resistors and the refusers, and in any organization that they're going to go out. Chief's crazy, but he didn't know what he's doing, and she doesn't know what she's doing, and all that stuff. And you just got to go, well, that's fine. Well, we're still going this way. So you just have to, engage them, embrace them, hope they'll come on board, but you got to keep moving the ship forward.
Well, at least they know what direction, right? Like my mom always says, people are going to get their undies in a bundle about a lot of different things. But if you know that they're going, what direction you're going, that helps, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And if they've been involved in it too, right?
Exactly.
I think there's a component to a very foundational piece. It's just, if you're building trust with the organization all along, you set that foundation. And then on top of that, you're communicating, you're asking for participation that further builds the trust. And like you said, there's always going to be the active resistors. But when we're talking about the majority of the organization, keeping them in the loop, I think that people just want to feel included in a lot of ways. And so even if they're not at the table per se, but keeping them apprised of directions and the why, understanding the purpose and the why, then it's all about accountability and ownership. And I think those are the major themes that we're talking about here.
Yeah, when we in Anaheim, we were looking at doing the nurse practitioner program and putting a nurse practitioner in the field with a medic, and we went down and actually sent down our senior staff with some union representatives to go down and kick the tires in Mesa, Arizona. And came back and said, that's a pretty good program, might work. So we went through the whole process. It took about 2.5 years to get through the state process, because we were the first ones in the state to do this, and so there was some heavy lifting to do it. And then we introduced it, and a lot of people were just adamantly opposed to it. It's just something different, right? And but after about a year and a half, and they were starting to see, these calls that were that suppression units were being called to, that they really couldn't do anything other than just take somebody to the hospital, but they really didn't need to go to the hospital, and the nurse practitioner could come in and actually provide a service, not have them transported, or connect the dots to the resources that the folks needed to meet. And it's just like the community paramedicine program here, the CARES program in Madison, and many others throughout the country. But those kind of programs are not received well when they're first launched, because it's change. And fire and emergency services doesn't like change. They just don't like anybody moving their cheese around. Right?
Right. Yep. Cheese, coffee, whatever it might be. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, and I've got a theory about that. I don't know if it's correct or not, but our firefighters and our paramedics, every day they're called 10, 12 times, and they never know what they're going out the door to. And so they're facing change all the time. Every call is a change, and they have to adapt and overcome. And so I guess my theory is the last thing they want to do is come back to the firehouse and have change, because they deal with change in the field from an emergency standpoint all the time. But when you come back, you kind of want, oh, this is my comfort zone, right? This is my
Stability.
area. This is my area of respite, and so don't jack with it.
Yeah.
And I get that, but I mean, and so I think we just have to look at it from a psychological standpoint of how we introduce that change. I was not real good at that, by the way. I think if I do it today, I probably would do it different than I did, 10 years ago. I'd probably be more sympathetic with that. But I've thought a lot about this, and I think there's some reality to that. Just being a firefighter coming up, I didn't really think about it at the time, but having the resistance as I've gone through as a chief for 27 years in different organizations and facing that in every organization, I think some of that has to deal with what our firefighters and medics deal with every day. And that is the consistency of I don't know what I'm going to next. But also there's another part of that is that we just don't want to change because you're introducing it. Right.
And that's sometimes the case. It all depends on who's introducing it, what time, and what's the motivation behind this, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot to it. I think that's a really good theory, and maybe that's why we're so reluctant to get rid of shifts. Our 24 hours is because in that 24 hours, there is that stability of the firehouse and
Yeah.
the crew there.
Yeah, but I think if we look at, and I know you're really, really, really big into the health and safety piece, but if you look at the research on sleep deprivation, sleep disruption, all of those things, I would think our firefighters would be saying, "Get me off of this 24-hour shift."
It's starting to change a little bit. I think as the research keeps coming out and as the data is so glaringly obvious that I think,
Yeah.
it's there's going to be a pretty big movement here the next, I believe, 1 to 3 years. I'm already, personally, I get some people asking about, well, what's one of the healthier shift options? So I think you'll see that's part of that. And of course, this goes back to everything you talked about. We need to embrace the data. We need to also look at how can we more effectively help our members and then still meet the service of the community. And then now you throw in this, how can we stay consistent and keep our culture? I mean, it's a challenge, but if you're not a leader willing to embrace that, like you said, you just kind of stay stagnant. And let me roll that into this question too. If you are listening to this, right? If you're a firefighter, it doesn't matter. Like, what are the 3 things you would do if you had to do it all over again? What are the 3 things you would start to do personally? Where would you focus? What would you read?
Well, I think the first thing I would focus on if you're a young firefighter, and if you don't have your own 1, 3, and 5 year game plan, then that's where you start. You start there. You need to educate yourself and get an education that is outside of the fire service. We're going to teach you how to do the fire stuff and the EMS stuff, right? You don't need a degree in, after an associate's degree, you don't need a degree in fire administration, and this is just my opinion. It's okay, but you need to have that outside perspective. You need to find out about how to run a business and, what's, the financial management, personnel management. Those are the pieces. It's not about, how to so much run a fire department. It's about that bigger picture. And one of the things I put in the newsletter that I write every month is readers are leaders. And read constantly, but read things that are outside of your profession, right?
Or in your profession that you don't necessarily think would give you anything, right? Like I'm not an administrator at this point, but man, oh man, I'm getting a ton from this, right?
Yeah.
Like you were saying, like,
Yeah, and don't sell yourself short, Aaron. You said you couldn't put that book down. It's not just the pictures that catch your eye.
there's great stuff in there, actually. Yeah.
Well, when I laid this text out, because I thought it was just going to be an update, and then as I looked at the first edition of this, I went, boy, this first edition is really bad. But there had been so much change in the last 10 years that it was like starting over. And so when I had to start over, I said, I want to write this to really plant the seeds in folks like Aaron to look at things differently. And so hopefully that's come throughout the text. That was kind of part of the mission, was to meet the FESHI guidelines for getting your appropriate schooling, in your degree and all that stuff. But it was also about just planting those seeds of change throughout the text, and getting people to start to think about things that they probably hadn't have thought of before. And a lot of the past administrative texts were just the regurgitation of what we do. And I kind of wanted to push that envelope a little bit.
So education, look at things differently, right? For those, new leaders or new people in the fire service. And, I kind of got you off track with the book, but I think it plays all into it, right? Like what would be another thing?
I think another thing for me that's probably really helped my career is find mentors. I was really fortunate. I was running I've shared this with Aaron, but I started with a couple other guys when I was in Fort Collins, a video-based business to actually, we did the first video-based training system that was college accredited in 1984 or something like that, 1985.
On beta.
Yeah, on beta. And Ron Coleman was our first guest. And Ron became my mentor. I went out and found him. But I found other mentors and reached out to them. Alan Brunsini was one. There were I've got 3 or 4. Ray Picard, he's passed away now. But I had 3 or 4 mentors that I reached out to and formally asked them, would you be my mentor? And they all agreed. But it was really powerful for me, because when you face things, whether you're a lieutenant, a captain, a battalion chief, or one of the senior leaders in your organization, you're going to run across things that you might not have faced. And so if you've got mentors that you can reach out to and go, hey, have you ever run across this? and invariably, each one of them would say, oh yeah, I've done that. Yeah, I've done this. And they would share with you their perspective. They wouldn't tell you, well, this is how you should do it. They would just say, you might want to think about some of these things. Here's some of the pitfalls. I ran into something like that, and I did it this way. It didn't totally work out well. So again, just having that outside perspective, critical, and gives you some perspective. So get 2 or 3 mentors, and get them from different professions if you can, because again, that's different perspectives. And that's the rule of life today, I think, is you need to have different perspectives because of just how fast the world's changing.
Yeah, and we could get comfortable, right? Like it's very easy to get comfortable and stay there, and that's why it's a perfect segue for me to say thank you for being a mentor for me. And the other thing that I asked you, because you talked about, when you came into a new city or community, you'd always try to reach out to the leaders within that community to help be on an advisory board for you. They never said no. And every time I ask you for, to meet for coffee or breakfast, you're yep, this time works. Even though you're busy interviewing, I think, like the CEO of Disney and some of these world renowned people, you still make time to meet me. And you even bought me breakfast last time. So I owe you this next time for sure. So thank you so much for this insight, Chief. We could go on for hours and and I hope we'll get another opportunity to do that. I mean, I know you and I will be personally. What we do at the end of the podcast, though, is we try to lighten it up a little bit, make it a little bit more real, and we put you in what we call the hot seat, where we ask some questions. They're varied. A lot of times, Janelle's mom and my mom help come up with them, and other people that we know.
Oh no!
Yep.
Moms are involved.
Well, there are two. They were our two listeners. Now I found one yesterday. We have 3 listeners to the podcast. So we're going to throw you in the hot seat and ask you some questions. And Janelle's going to start it off. She's got some good ones for us today.
All right. So I learned something new about you earlier today, that you're a drummer. And I would like to know your favorite drummer.
Well, I really have, I guess my favorite drummer is Danny Seraphin. He was the original drummer in Chicago. And I grew up, I mean, he's probably just a couple years older than me, but I grew up when I was in high school listening to him when they first came out in the late 60s. And so I followed them, you know, for my entire life. I've seen them probably 7 or 8 times. And then I had the opportunity to actually meet him when I was in Anaheim and spend about an hour with him before he was doing a show. And then we got to go up and watch him play on stage for about an hour and a half. So it was just a real treat for me. But he's always been my favorite drummer. I do have another really good friend who's a drummer, famous drummer named Bernard Purdy. Bernard played with many groups. He was he just kind of floated around and played with a lot of different famous people. But Bernard is just a really class guy, and just known him for probably 10 years now. So those 2 guys definitely would be on the list.
That's awesome. Are we going to see you on the circuit? Is this going to be your new thing?
No,
floating around playing drums?
I would love to be on the circuit. But you know, I'm not a bad drummer. You know, I've got 3 sets downstairs, so if one's not working, I just move to the other one.
You got a direct connect with a company too, do you not?
Well, yeah, the 2 of the guys that I interviewed on my podcast were John Good and Don Lombardi. And Don Lombardi was the original founder of DW Drums in Oxnard, California. And he started out, it was called Drumworks, and that's DW. And it was a small shop in Santa Monica. It was just him, and he was doing lessons. And Don was a pretty good drummer, good session drummer, and was giving lessons. And then John came along, and John was kind of the equipment guy. So he would build stuff, and together they built this company, DW, that has a couple hundred employees now. Has a great, nice plant in Oxnard, California. They're shipping drums all over the world, and they've got quite a famous lineup of drummers now. Neil Peart was one of their drummers, but they've, just really great people, and really down to earth, even though they've got this, you know, conglomerate. And but I think they make the best drums in the world. So it's just been really fun to get to know them.
So if the Beach Boys call, you would consider it, or Chicago, or, you know.
Yeah, well, you know, I consider it, yeah, but you know, they're not going to call because I'm not that good.
Well, I will represent you. I'm gonna market you a little bit here. We'll see if we can do something for you. So our next question: what's your favorite book right now to read, and what would you recommend for people to read?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, can I grab it off of my shelf?
Sure.
Yeah.
Let me grab it. So when I get the name right.
He's got books in his background, and I have coins, patches, and T-shirts, and a sign that says "Check your poop." So I tell you.
Well, I'm a really big fan of Mitch Albom and Malcolm Gladwell, but Mitch Albom's latest book is called "The Stranger in the Lifeboat," and I just read it, and he's just an exceptional writer, but it's really a good book.
What's
And
the central
what's
theme?
that?
What's the central theme of that one?
Hope. Yeah, it's really about hope.
Perfect. He wrote his other book was that Mitch wrote was is it The 5 People You Meet in Heaven? Is that his book?
Yeah. Tuesdays with Maury. There's
Tuesdays with
another
Maury.
really good book. It's Finding Chica. Was very, very powerful, and it's about a personal experience that he and his wife went through, and yeah, it's a very good book.
So if someone needs a little uplifting,
Yeah,
grab that book. Perfect.
yeah, he's always any of his books are always good. I think Malcolm Gladwell, on the other hand, makes you think a little bit differently, because he's delving into sometimes a little more societal stuff that's a little bit more historic based, but also very good perspective on just how society works sometimes and doesn't work, and just some unique insights there.
Well, sort of related to this theme, we talked about with the Leadership Crucible Foundation and the power of storytelling. So, on that theme, I'm curious if you can share with us a story that stands out to you from when you first joined the fire service, maybe a story about an incident that you went on, or even a story you heard that really impacted you at an early stage in your fire service career.
Well, I mean, the one that comes to mind is when this happened to me when I was in the recruit academy, and back in the day, recruit academies are still difficult. But I went into the academy in 1979, so it was a little bit different perspective then. So it was a multi-agency academy. We were going to Aurora, Colorado, because I was in Fort Collins. There was 8 of us from Fort Collins going in. There's like 27, 28 people in the academy. Chief walked in, walks in, looks around the room, says, well, look around. He said, about 8 or 10 of you are not going to be here in 10 weeks. That's all he said, turned around, walked out. And then the battalion chief came in, and we were off and running. And every week, somebody would disappear. They just would be gone. Or they would get called up and said, come to the chief's office, and then they wouldn't return. And so about week 9, they called me in. And I'm walking down the hallway, and I'm thinking, this must be it. I can't remember what I did wrong, but I was already thinking about what I'm going to do next. And I'd moved from Nebraska to Colorado to take the job, so I was already processing. Do I go home? Do I just what am I going to do? And so they come in, and I must have looked like I was going to pass out or something. And she said, "Just sit down. You're okay. You're not getting let go. Don't worry about it." He said, well, first thing, you're going to speak at the graduation. So I said, I don't like speaking. He said, well, get over that, because you're going to speak. And he said, but what we want to talk to you about today is, he said, you've got a different skill set than we see in most recruits. And he said, I think you have the opportunity to be a chief officer, and maybe even a fire chief. He said, because you connect the dots differently than most people. And I said, well, I appreciate that. I'm just trying to get out of here. And he said, well, I don't want you to think about it for the first year. But he said, when you get off probation, he said, I want you to start thinking about what you want to be when you grow up, because you have that potential. But he said, if you don't use your potential, you'll never get there.
Wow.
And yeah, I walked out, and I'm going, first of all, I'm glad I'm not getting let go. Yeah,
right.
What's that guy talking about? And so as I got on the floor and kind of started talking, my battalion chief at the time came in about 4 or 5 months, and he goes, yeah, he said, they told us that you were a little bit different. He said, but he said, I didn't want to say anything, but he said, I think they might be right. He said, you asked questions differently. You look at things much differently than most people do. He said, I think you need to think about what you're going to be 10 years from now. And so that's what I did. As soon as I got off probation, I mapped out. I wanted to be a fire chief, but I knew here's all the steps, here's the education I'm going to need to get. I had no education when I came into the fire service. So in 10 years, I had got 3 degrees, promoted up to battalion chief. And in year, I think 12 or 13, I went to be the fire chief. So I got to be a fire chief at 34, 35. That would have never happened if they wouldn't have sat down and said, you have potential. And I've seen that. I've interviewed 1,500 firefighters, and I've hired probably 500. And you can see people that have it, that have a different perspective and have that drive to do it. And I think that's the other part of it. So the interesting piece of that story, when I was sworn as the IFC president, guess who shows up? That chief.
That chief.
Walks up,
Wow.
says, "Told you so."
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. And I mean, kudos to you for seizing on that opportunity. Kudos to them for seeing it and taking that moment to make sure you saw it in yourself, because that's a big part of it, is building that confidence in someone.
Yeah,
That's just amazing.
yeah, and I've taken that to heart as a chief. When I see talent, I will pull them aside. I've told 2 or 3 people, you have the potential to be a fire chief, but you're going to have to get your ducks in a row, and you have to get ready to do that if you're going to do it. Or you can be a chief officer, or you'll make a great captain. So I think part of leadership is that when you see that, you encourage people and share that perspective with them, because oftentimes, especially in the fire service, they get pigeonholed. Especially when they get in the firehouse, man, they get pigeonholed and say, well, you can't promote for 8 years. We don't want you to promote for 8 years to captain or lieutenant, whatever the rank structure is. I'm going, well, why not? If you've got the talent and the skill set to do it, then go for it. Don't let somebody tell you that you can't do it. And I've talked to so many brilliant young men and women, and I say, why aren't you taking the test? Well, I've only been on 5 years, and it's usually I want to be on the back seat for 8 or 10 years. And I go, why would you want to be on the back seat for 8 or 10 years? That's a 30-year career, right? Move up, make a difference.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, they're enculturated that way. Our culture's that way. They tell you, Aaron, you can't promote until you've been on the job for 10 years. There's a lot of organizations like that, and that's terrible. So thankful to them that they did that. It just really opened up a whole new door for me. I never knew. Again, I started as a volunteer in Nebraska. That's how I got into and that was by fluke. My brother-in-law asked me if I would just join because they needed help. I wasn't even ever looking. I never was looking at the fire service as an option. And then when I got into it, I thought, well, this is fun, and I'm pretty good at it. So I think I'll try and find a job where I can get paid to do this. Right? And so
thank God for us, you did.
Well,
Yeah.
So some people would say that, others not. But it's part of leadership. So.
And I love that story because it really shows the how everything comes full circle in a way, because they asked you, think about your plan. What's your plan in 5 years, 10 years? And now here you are talking to us about the importance of developing a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year plan, and departments coming up with their own plan, their strategic vision. And I just love that that's kind of the through line through all of this.
Yeah, I think it's extremely important. You don't get you don't get to the top of the mountain unless you've got a game plan to do it. And you don't win the Super Bowl unless you have a game plan, or the NBA championship. Nothing happens good without a plan unless you're just extremely, extremely lucky. And in our profession, extremely lucky usually doesn't happen. And in most professions, I mean, you've got to have a game plan and a strategy, and whether that's for yourself or for your organization, if you're going to be successful. And it gets back to, if you're in your own comfort zone, and if you just want to ride on the back seat until you're 63 years old, then that's your choice. But that may not have been the path that you could have taken if you would have actually created a plan for yourself, because I've seen a lot of great people limit themselves, and that's unfortunate.
Perfect. Well said. Thank you so much for being here. You can hear more of Chief Bruegman at the Leadership Crucible Foundation.org. You can email Janelle and I at bettereveryshift@firerescue1.com if you have questions, comments. And please rate and review the show. You can also, if you're listening to this, you can watch us on YouTube and on firerescue1.com. But most importantly, everyone, make sure that you learn something, do something, and share something to make you and those around you better every shift. Thanks for listening, everybody.
When safety is top priority, you need more than a radio. Meet the XL Extreme 400P, tailor-made to meet the most rigorous fire standards. This radio withstands blasts of heat up to 1700 degrees and repeated 3-meter drops. Built with material from both their space division and their tactical comms, this is one tough radio you're going to need. Schedule your demo today. Visit www.l3harris.com/contact-us.